Rachel Holt for NESN.com. Thanks for joining our fantasy football podcast. I'm joined by John Halpin of Fox Sports. John, thanks for being here.
You're welcome. Lots of injuries this week, huh, Rachel?
Lots of injuries, and you're the fantasy football expert, so we're going to pick your brain a little bit. We have a lot of questions. Week 2 was all about, like you said, the injuries to the running backs. We now know why people preach wide receiver heavy drafts to begin with. First, we have Adrian Peterson, who went down with a torn meniscus, and then Danny Woodhead with a torn ACL. Some big names out there that are leaving fantasy owners with a lot of questions. First, let's start with AP. What do you do about his injury if you own him on your team?
Well, the thing is, we don't know how long he's going to be out. It could be any. Like the coach said, he's not ruling him out for week 3. You should rule him out for week 3. It sounds like it could be a 2-week thing, but if they get in there and it's worse than they thought, it could be a lot longer, could be the full season. Let's estimate 4 weeks, and the Vikings have a bye in week 6, which will help you. You can find his replacement on his own team. Jerick McKinnon is someone I loved in draft season. I actually drafted him on a few teams. He's got terrific talent. He can catch the ball. He's an explosive runner. He's not as big as Peterson, but he has great breakaway speed. There is the worry that Matt Asiata will get the goal line carries there. And one of the beat writers at the Star Tribune in Minneapolis said he thought it would be a 65-35 split in favor of McKinnon, but Asiata could get the goal line carries. Okay, that's fine. If it's a 65-35 on a team that runs as much as the Vikings, and I think they'll keep doing that, McKinnon looks to be a really nice pickup. He's owned in 17% of FoxSports.com leagues, so you'll probably be able to get him.
Danny Woodhead had a big breakout week 1. And you hate to see him go down with an injury. How do we go about replacing him?
Well, you can't replace him on his own team because Melvin Gordon is owned by too many people already. He's averaging 20 carries a game. If you have Melvin Gordon, this is going to help you because he's going to carry the load right now. There are some other backs out there that you can look at. I mean, Arian Foster might be out this week. It sounds like he will be. Well, that means Jay Ajayi on the Dolphins is probably going to get a bunch of carries. He's owned in about 40% of our leagues, so he might or might not be available. Cameron Artis-Payne sounds like he's going to fill in for Jonathan Stewart with the Panthers. Stewart might miss a week or 2, it sounds like. But Artis-Payne, there's going to be a committee there. But last year, he had more touches. When Jonathan Stewart was out for 3 weeks at the end of the season, Cameron Artis-Payne had more touches than Fozzie Whitaker and Mike Tolbert combined. Ron Rivera said on Monday that Whitaker is a change of pace back. Sure sounds like they're going to lean to Artis-Payne against the Vikings this week. I could see him getting 15 carries.
As far as some other guys to target on the waiver wire this week, who are some names that you're looking at?
Well, the running backs we talked about, there's one other one. Dwayne Washington in Detroit. Amir Abdullah's hurt. Sounds like a sprained foot. Things don't look good for week 3. So Theo Riddick's going to play a bunch. We know that, but he plays a bunch already. The rookie Dwayne Washington has been sort of their goal line guy now. There were some hints on Monday. He could get 10, 12 carries this week. So that's another guy. If you miss on those first few running backs that we talked about, he's someone you could get. Another one, Dennis Pitt, a tight end for the Ravens. He has become Joe Flacco's maybe favorite target. So he's someone that's available in most leagues, and it looks like he's back from injury after 2 years off.
Okay, week 2, we're starting to have more answers. Week 1, we're told not to panic, even though we're kind of panicking inside if our team doesn't do well. Week 2, still a lot of questions out there, but now we're starting to see some of the guys fall into consistent patterns. And Sammy Watkins is one of those guys that really hasn't produced. I know he's dealing with a foot injury. Do you think he's worth it for fantasy owners to keep on your roster, or would you look elsewhere in the wide receiver position?
I wouldn't dump Sammy Watkins if I owned him. I know you have to be disappointed because you were looking at potentially a top 10 wide receiver. You probably drafted him in the 3rd, maybe even 2nd round. Well, you have to scale back your expectations on Sammy Watkins because it sounds like the foot is going to be something he tries to play through. So it's not like he'll be an injured reserve and you know that he'll be out. You kind of have to ride with the ebbs and flows of his season. That doesn't make him a guy you cut, though. I still would think that maybe he'll have some good games. You probably don't have 4 receivers on your roster that are better than him. It's just that top 10 season you were hoping for, you're probably not going to get it.
Okay, Todd Gurley really hasn't produced at this point too much. He's letting a lot of fantasy owners down as well. Is he one of the guys where you have to skew your expectations for him as well?
I would like to buy low on Todd Gurley if I could. I would like to trade let's say, number 2 wide receiver to get Todd Gurley, and here's why. Everybody's worried right now because he had 2 bad games. And, the 49ers weren't a good opponent, but they played well. The Seahawks certainly were a good opponent. The thing with them, everybody's saying, well, They have a bad quarterback and a bad offensive line. This is no different than the Rams were last year when Todd Gurley got 1,100 yards rushing in 13 games, and he was the third leading rusher in the league. I think he's going to be someone who has huge games and then maybe struggles sometimes, but that's what you bought when you drafted him. You knew what he was, and maybe you thought he'd step forward, but I still think Todd Gurley's going to have a strong year, and if you could float some offers out there for him, you might be really happy you did.
Okay, let's talk tight ends, because a lot of people have questions about tight ends at this point. Of course, Rob Gronkowski, we haven't seen him play yet. We have Zach Ertz out with a rib injury. Coby Fleener really hasn't done much. I know personally I had Zach Ertz in one of my leagues. I picked up Eric Ebron, who didn't do too much for me in week 2 either. So
right.
Running out of answers here. What do we do in the tight end position?
Well, we mentioned Dennis Pitta earlier, and the good thing about him is at FoxSports.com, he's available in 97% of leagues. I think he got 12 targets from Joe Flacco on Sunday. The weird thing about the Ravens is you look at the receiving core, the wide receivers, and Mike Wallace has 3 touchdowns, and Steve Smith's there, and Kamar Aiken, and then Rashad Perriman came back. But you can't really trust any one of them. You might like Wallace the best. Pitta looks like the one guy in the receiving core in the Ravens you can trust because Flacco seems to really like him. There are other options. I'll give you one that's available in almost every league. If Ertz is out for a little while, Brent Selleck stepped up as he's the starting tight end last night, but he's more of a blocker. Trey Burton was the backup. I think he caught 5 for 49 and a touchdown. I would bet that Trey Burton's available in your league. It's a little bit of a flyer, but if he's the receiving option at tight end, that's not too bad.
Okay, I know you're in Carolina Panthers territory over there. Great win for them in week 2. But we have to talk about the New England Patriots a little bit because they've been leaving a lot of questions. Of course, Jimmy Garoppolo comes in there on Sunday. He looked solid out there, and a lot of people were standing behind him and thinking, maybe 16-0 this team this year. Of course, he goes out with an injury late in the second quarter. And then we have our backup in, Jacoby Brissett. So now a lot of questions regarding Jimmy's injury, and what Jacoby will do out there if he is a starter in week 3. In terms of starting New England's offensive players, what suggestions do you have at this point with so many questions now about the team?
Well, I think as much of a miracle worker as Bill Belichick is, and I'm certainly not a Belichick hater, I think that's a really tall order against the Texans defense to think that they're gonna score enough to win. As far as the Patriots offensive players, well, Gronk, if he was back, I would start because even though he gets manhandled by other defenders, they get away with a lot against him. The tight end would seem to be the safest bet if you have a third string quarterback. Otherwise, LeGarrette Blount, I think he's 3rd or 4th in the league in carries. I think you're going to see more of that. Now, look, it's a tough defense that they're playing against, like I said, but if in fantasy, guys who get 20 carries are few and far between. And LeGarrette Blount's going to be one of those guys this week. If you own him, I think you probably have to start him.
Okay, as far as those matchups that you've been circling for week 3, I know you already mentioned one. What other teams are you looking at?
Well, I'm certainly looking at the Dolphins against the Browns just because I think the Browns are really bad all over the place. I think, for instance, if you're looking to stream a quarterback, if you had Garoppolo starting for you and you sort of dumpster dived on quarterback in the draft, Ryan Tannehill could be an option for you this week. He's owned in, I think, 20% of leagues at FoxSports.com. He's playing against a bad team. He had a good game the other day against the Patriots. I know it was when he was playing catch-up and he was throwing a lot in the second half, but Ryan Tannehill's someone you could look at. Another one, I think the Seahawks, they've got some offensive players banged up. They've struggled on offense in the first couple of weeks. I think with the 49ers coming to town that you're going to see a bit of a rebound from them.
Okay, defenses. We have to talk defenses. A lot of people get attached to their defenses, and from the advice that I get, you really shouldn't, because each week is different depending on the matchups. So as far as defenses that we can pick up this week, who are some teams that you're targeting?
A friend of mine says about fantasy defenses, date, don't marry. And I think that's an interesting analogy. I don't get attached to fantasy defenses. I like to pick them based on the matchup. I think the first one is certainly the Dolphins against the Browns. Look, the Browns, not only are they bad, they're probably down to their third string quarterback in Cody Kessler. The Dolphins are at home in this one. I think they're just going to feast on him. They're owned in only 10% of leagues at FoxSports.com. If you can't get them, check out the Bucs. Not the greatest defense. They gave up 40 the other day against the Cardinals, but they're at home against Case Keenum and the Rams. Now, I do think Todd Gurley's going to rebound, but Case Keenum can turn the ball over. So they're owned in 4% of leagues at Fox. That wouldn't be a bad fallback option if you don't get the Dolphins.
Okay, I know you do a lot with daily fantasy. Are there any players that you should get at a low value this week that you would consider adding to your roster? You think they might have a breakout performance?
I think, I don't have the prices in front of me, but I would think Allen Robinson is a good bounce back candidate. He's a guy who, he caught 80 passes last year, 14 touchdowns for the Jaguars. The Jaguars had a tough day on Sunday, but I think their offense is still pretty good. They've got the Ravens coming in, and they can be thrown on. I think Robinson's somebody whose value based on the first 2 weeks is going to be a little low.
Okay, heading into week 3, any big advice you have for fantasy owners at this point? Something that they should keep their eye on? Something that they may not have thought about at this point?
No, I mean, filling in those blanks, I think that, with the running back position, if you don't get these guys this week, if you don't get Jerick McKinnon, for instance, on your free agent wire, or Cameron Artis-Payne, there will be more. Running back injuries happen. So if you're playing the wire on running backs, look, try to get a couple of these guys this week. If you don't, be patient, plug in what you have. Don't panic and try to trade for a running back because you're frustrated in week 2. The running backs tend to come available on the wire. Someone else might go down with a season-ending injury next week, and opportunity and value matter when it comes to running backs. So I'd say don't panic if your running back position is being pieced together right now.
Okay, good to know. Last and more importantly, John, where can we find more from you?
Well, all my work, podcasts, articles, things like that at foxsports.com/fantasy, and I'm on Twitter at jhalpin37.
Okay, thanks so much. And I have to ask you, how are you doing in your fantasy team so far? Good?
I'm doing okay. In the league you and I are in together, my team, I think I'm 2-0, but my team is not quite as good as yours because you're blowing everybody away, but we're going to have to work on that.
All right. We'll have more answers from you. Well, I'm getting all the advice from you, so I'm just taking that and running with it. Thank you so much, John. We'll have more from you in week 4. Looking forward to it.
Thanks a lot, Rachel.